Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're all about plunging into information, often dense stacks of it, to find those insights hidden just below the surface.
That's the plan.
And today, well, we have something fascinating. We're heading into the world of declassified government documents. Now, you might picture, dusty, dull administrative memos.
Dry as dust sometimes.
Exactly. But what if I told you that sometimes these seemingly boring papers can actually unlock incredible details about high-level intelligence operations, things that really shaped events?
That's precisely what we're doing today. We've got our hands on two memos, short ones, but really revealing. They're recently declassified from the National Archives,
Okay.
both dated April 7, 1977. And our mission, our deep dive here, is to pull out the crucial insights these offer about, well, a pretty mysterious operation, and also just how official secrecy works.
Okay, let's unpack this then. So these aren't just random papers you pulled out. They're specific. Addressed to a D. Lavery, OGG, via A. Adana, DDOPICG,
Yeah.
and sent from a P. Hiffner, CSCDIP. Lots of acronyms there.
Standard government stuff, yeah. But the path tells a story.
And the subject line is identical on both. Classification of EX 3600. What strikes me is they mention these are responses to a request for, and I'm quoting here, a couple sentences of factual data as to why this document's classified.
Right, it's not just a routine filing, it's a justification.
A tiny window into justifying secrecy even then.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that the core purpose here, back in '77, was clearly about the FOIA exemption, the Freedom of Information Act.
Ah, right.
They needed to figure out the proper exemption for this document, EX 3600. It shows a really meticulous review process, not just a rubber stamp.
So even decades later, they're carefully checking, should this stay secret? Or can it be declassified?
Exactly. It tells you the information inside was considered sensitive for a long, long time.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting for me. Both memos, right at the start, mention something called Michaos.
MICHAOS.
Yeah. And there's this phrase that just jumps out, ex post facto, meaning after the fact. Since I was not associated with Operation My Chaos during its existence,
Yeah.
that phrasing feels loaded.
It does. It suggests maybe a complex history, or maybe the operation was over by '77, but its legacy as documents were still very much alive.
Or the name was used differently over time.
Possibly. But the critical point, the thing that really stands out in these memos, is the statement. My case was one of the most sensitive operations conducted under BD pages.
DDP, Directorate Plans, the CIA's clandestine side.
That's the one, their operations arm. And calling it one of the most sensitive, well, that's a huge deal in intelligence circles. It signals top-tier importance, high stakes.
So when they say most sensitive in that context,
Yeah.
what does that really mean? What kind of operations are we likely talking about here? More than just information gathering.
Well, most sensitive strongly implies things like covert action or perhaps intelligence gathering so delicate that exposure would cause severe diplomatic fallout or damage national security significantly. And the memos back this up. They detail the control level. These operations were, and I quote, repeatedly sanctioned in writing by the DCI.
The Director of Central Intelligence,
Get
the
it.
top boss.
The very top. So not some rogue thing. This was approved repeatedly at the highest level. And furthermore, the activity was deemed so sensitive, it went through extremely restricted handling channels.
Extremely restricted.
Yeah, think about that. It paints a picture of intense compartmentalization. Need to know doesn't even begin to cover it. Only a tiny number of people would have been read in. It just underscores the risk if it ever got out.
Wow. Okay, so if it's that sensitive, sanctioned by the DCI, super restricted, you'd expect everything linked to it to be top secret.
Right. You might think so.
But the memos say the default from a chaos documents, formal or informal, was at least secret. Yet EX 3600 itself, the document they're discussing, is classified confidential. And the writer says that's proper. Why? Why not secret?
That's a really sharp observation. It gets into the nitty-gritty of classification. While the Operation My Chaos was clearly highly sensitive, maybe warranting secret or even top secret handling overall, this specific document, EX 3600, might not contain the absolute crown jewels, like the specific sources or methods that demand a secret stamp.
Oh, okay.
Confidential means unauthorized disclosure could still cause, identifiable damage to national security, but maybe not the serious damage threshold required for secret. So it suggests they looked carefully at the content of these 12 pages, not just the operation's overall sensitivity.
Right, a very fine-grained assessment. So we've covered the sensitivity, the high-level approval, the classification debate. Let's get to the what was actually in those classified pages.
Right.
Pages 2 through 12, they specify.
Okay, yeah. What was worth all this fuss?
Exactly.
The memos give us two key clues about the content. First, the information was, quote, seemingly acquired from through sensitive sources method.
Okay, protecting sources and methods, standard intelligence practice. Crucial.
Absolutely critical. Protecting how you know things and who told you is paramount. But the second point is maybe more surprising.
What's that?
The pages contain frequent mention of FBI information concerning many of the peace movement group's organizations.
Wait, FBI information about the peace movement linked to this highly sensitive CIA operation.
That's what it says. It even notes that the FBI reports received by Micaeus were invariably classified for the most part confidential.
So this top-level DCI-sanctioned CIA operation, Micaeus, was receiving and presumably using FBI intelligence on domestic groups.
It certainly points that way. It connects this very secretive operation directly to domestic surveillance, or at least domestic information gathering, focus on civilian groups active during that era.
Which, as we know, became a huge issue later with investigations into intelligence agency overreach.
Precisely. It highlights that blurring of lines between foreign intelligence and domestic matters that was characteristic of the time and later heavily scrutinized.
It really is remarkable. Just two short kind of bureaucratic memos from 1977.
40-plus years ago.
Yeah. And they unlock this whole picture. A most sensitive operation, top-level approvals, restricted channels, protecting sources, and this link to the FBI and the peace movement. It's a snapshot of how things worked.
Absolutely. It shows the focus, the methods, the extreme caution, and these sometimes surprising connections, history hidden in plain sight, just waiting in the archives.
So this deep dive, just from these 2 pages, has shown us quite a bit about Micaeus.
It really has. The high-level DCI sanctioning, those restricted channels, the connection to sensitive sources and methods, and yeah, that link to FBI information on peace movement groups, it's a lot from 2 small memos.
It really is.
And it makes you think, doesn't it? Considering how carefully documents like this EX 3600 are still reviewed, debated for declassification decades after the fact, what does this ongoing process, this enduring secrecy, tell us? What does this suggest about the long shadow these past operations cast on how we even understand our own history today?